Hi, this is Nina McLean with BVTV. Today we're having educational workshops at Garden City Seeds, and I'd like to introduce you to our workshop leaders. First one?
Yes, I'm John Schneeberger. I'm with Garden City Seeds, and I'm doing one on selecting varieties for Montana and this area in general.
I'm Lucy Brieger. I'm with Lifeline Farm, and I'll be helping people to figure out how to start their own seeds.
I'm Kerry Wall McLean, also with Garden City and Down Home Project, and I'll be talking about soil fertility and safe pest control.
Well, thank you, and now let's take a look at the workshops.
The talk is how to pick varieties for Montana, and I guess the main things to look for are days to maturity, cold tolerance, and cold soil emergence. All the varieties that we carry, we've at one time or another grown here successfully to the fruit stage in Montana. So here in the Bitterroot Valley. So we selected all these varieties, and most of the varieties that we carry, the vast majority of them, in any other catalog and any other selection of varieties are considered to be the earliest and most cold hardy. Now, of these varieties, there are certain ones that are more cold hardy than others. So it's basically a matter of selecting those for your particular area. Now, everybody knows that your climate can vary quite a bit depending upon where you are. Bitterroot Valley happens to be quite mild. A lot of the valleys, lower valleys in the western part of the state are quite mild as far as relatively long number of growing days as far as frost dates are concerned. The one problem we do have in the western part of the state is that we have cold nights. And cold nights means less thermal units or less heat units, and heat is what matures plants. So consequently, we select varieties not only that are short season, but also seem to do well in cold sites. Very often we found early on when we were selecting varieties, when we first started this company about 8 years ago, was that some varieties that had a short number of days to maturity didn't mature as other ones that had even longer listed days to maturity. And the reason why that was is because certain varieties seem to be more tolerant of cold evenings and seem to be also just generally hardier. We need, in our particular climate, we need a very hardy plant because it's got to deal with temperatures at night that can sometimes be regularly in the 40s at night, and daytime temperatures that are very high. And also we have low relative humidity and a little bit of wind, and consequently we also need plants that are somewhat heat tolerant too. Some of the broccolis and some of the spinaches particularly will bolt quite early in the season because we just get a lot of heat. We're not like the maritime climates where it's uniformly cool and moist, where they can grow cold crops and don't have to worry about bolting. So just selecting crops simply by days to maturity doesn't always work very well. The three areas that are good to, as a rule of thumb, to select for your particular area are days to maturity. That's the first one. Now, days to maturity is kind of a tricky thing because different catalogs say different things. The ones that we have, the days that we have listed are what we've observed, kind of an average. Now that can vary quite greatly depending upon the type of growing year that you have, whether it was particularly cold or particularly warm that year, your particular growing conditions, whether you've screwed up or not and run over the plant with a tractor or things like that, and various things like that. So what we've done is basically take an overall average. We've also looked at the average days to maturity that variety, if it's something that's commonly available, is listed in other catalogs, and then we use that as kind of as a comparison to other varieties. If they list it as 65 days compared to another variety as 75 days, and it's listed consistently like that in catalogs, we will assume that that's an early variety. So consequently, we not only take them as an average of what we've observed, we also take them as a comparison to other varieties. And to not get tripped up in catalogs, the best thing to do is to compare the number of days and not take that as a benchmark that's always going to take place. If it says 75 days, that's 75 days compared to, say, another variety of corn that's 85 days. You know it's 10 days earlier than that. So if you have any experience with that corn, then you can compare it. Another good thing to look at is overall cold tolerance of your plant. And that's basically has to do with how well they grow during cold periods. And there are some species that are cold tolerant just by their nature, mainly the brassicas. Everybody knows the cauliflower, broccoli, kohlrabi, kale have good cold tolerance just naturally. And then there's certain plants that just seem to grow better in cold weather, like certain types of beans, like say Verde Rocancourt, which although beans is a warm weather crop, Verde Rocancourt is a cold tolerant variety. Another thing to look at is cold soil emergence. And this has to do with how things germinate in cold soils. In here we have listed the germination for different soil temperatures, and that's one of the most important things to look at when you want to have success in gardens in Montana, is how warm the temperature is of the soil, because that really will have a definite impact on how well your plants will germinate in the soil and whether you'll be calling us up and complaining about the crummy seeds you sold to us, we sold to you. So that's really important to look at, especially with warm weather, warm season crops. Beans and corn, squash, and melons. You really have to pay attention to the heat of the soil. And this can really vary quite a bit depending upon your location, obviously. If you live in a frost pocket, or if you live up a canyon and you're at a higher altitude and it's cold, obviously your soils aren't going to warm up as fast. Another thing, it has to do with your soils too. If you have a lot of clay and heavier soils, they warm up slower than your sandy loams do. Also the exposure of your soil. If you have a southern exposure, those soils will warm up better too. This is probably quite remedial for some of you. So I think right now what I'll do is I'll go through the catalog and I'll point out some particular varieties. Now I think I'll just go through and basically talk about the hardiest ones. And once again, I would say that if you live in the Bitterroot Valley, you can grow everything in this catalog. But if you live in a little bit harsher climate for a variety of reasons, either microclimatically or because you live in a different part of the state, it might be a good idea to look at these hardier varieties. Once again, beans are quite difficult to get going if the soil is cold and particularly wet. We seem to have a problem with that sometimes in the spring. Some of the ones with the best cold soil emergence, and we picked ones particularly for that because we don't sell to gardeners seed that's treated with fungicides, the Captam, the Thiram, the metalaxyl and things like that, because we don't want to handle it, because we're an organic company, and also because the stuff gives me a terrible case of prickly heat, so I don't want to get near it. Besides that, it's also not really necessary if you pay attention to the temperature of the soil. In many cases, you've got plenty of times to mature beans in our climate, so there's no need to really rush the season. Provider is an old, dependable, cold soil-tolerant variety. It'll germinate in cold soils, and it also will grow quite well in cooler weather. The only problem with it, it's an old string-type bean. It has a string. It's not the stringless, the newer ones with less fiber. It's got a good meaty flavor, though. Venture is a very cold soil-tolerant bean. It's also quite early. It's probably one of the best for northern gardeners, Venture is. It's an improved Blue Lake type, which many of you are familiar with the old Blue Lake bean, which is well known for its flavor, and it's got a very excellent flavor. What it is it's a cross between a number of different Blue Lake selections, and it's got what's called, in a fancy term, transgressive segregation, which means that it was earlier and more productive and had better cold soil tolerance than both of its parent strains. So it was really quite a find. Of the wax beans, Verde Rocancourt is also real good as a cool weather bean. We have a little bit of a problem growing dry beans in our climate because of the wet weather that we seem to have in late August and early September. So you want to get a bean that will mature out before then. We found Jacob's cattle, the Indian woman bean, and the the navy bean to be quite early. Of the earliest, those, I would say the Indian woman bean is probably one of the surest bets you can get. It's a relatively low-growing plant, but it matures beans very quickly. And if you've had trouble growing dry beans anywhere else, I would really suggest that one. Of the garbanzos, I don't know if any of you have ever grown garbanzos before, but the Kabuli Black is an extremely cold-tolerant garbanzo. It's from Afghanistan, and it can take a slight frost in the fall. It also seems to grow well under drier conditions. It's somewhat drought-tolerant. It seems to like a kind of a sandy, not real humusy, rich soil. It seems to do actually better on kind of a poorer soil than other plants. This is what you'll find occasionally with certain species of plants, that they don't really perform well on an extremely rich ground. I don't know if everybody's had an experience with tomatoes. When you've grown them on ground that is very, very rich, they'll just all go to leaf and you won't get a lot of fruit. The Kabulis are kind of like that to a certain extent, not in the same way, but they do seem to do quite well on poorer soils. So that's kind of good for two reasons. If you like the black garbanzo, of course, which it's really excellent in things like falafel and Middle Eastern dishes. Fava beans are a real good bet generally for our area because they are cold tolerant. It's one of the first beans that you can grow. You can plant your favas about the same time as you plant your peas. They are quite cold soil tolerant. They emerge really well in cold weather. They have a problem with heat tolerance though, so this is another thing that you have to worry about if you want to plant it too late. If you plant your fava beans too late, they will not grow very well. They will not produce seed, or will not produce beans. So you want to make sure you get them in about the same time you plant your peas. The iPro is the more heat tolerant of the fava beans. Once again, our problem is not only cold soil tolerance. Everybody knows it can be 90 degrees and hot and dry in May, and that can cause problems with your broccoli and your spinach and your fava beans. So iPro is the one to pick for that if you think you know what's going to happen, which if you do, you should call me up and tell me, and I'll plan accordingly. As far as early cabbages go, the Primax, the early Jersey Wakefield, is really a reliable. That's an old hybrid. It's an old heirloom variety, the early Jersey Wakefield. It's the old conehead varieties, and it's really quite reliable cropper here in the valley. I'd really suggest growing that if you have any problems with various problems, any problems at all growing cabbage. Carrots, everybody loves carrots. Planting carrots in March is not advisable. I would wait until April at least to plant carrots. You need to be at least 40 degrees for them to germinate. One of the best early carrots is Kinko 6-inch. It's kind of a conical shaped carrot. It's actually a type of Chantenay, which is those stumpy carrots. There's a Kinko 4-inch and the Kinko 6-inch. We like the Kinko 6-inch. Will give you a good sized carrot early in the season, and its flavor is not quite as good as the Scarlet Nantes, but its earliness is definitely a factor in selecting it because of the fact that everybody seems to like early carrots. Seneca Horizon is also one of the earliest, hardiest, and largest eared of the early corns. So if you like a big ear, I'd go with Seneca Horizon. If you like flavor, I would go with sugar buns or honey buns. I had nothing to do with selecting this name. These people down at Crookham, they come up. They've also got another one called Quickie. I don't know where these people's minds are at, but anyway, regardless, sugar buns is what you see next to it is an SE, which means it's sugary enhanced. And sugary enhanced varieties have a particular gene that slows the conversion of sugar to starch in the kernels of the ear. And this makes for, number one, a sweeter ear. It can store more sugar as a percentage than the normal sugary ones, so they're sweeter, and they also maintain their sweetness after harvest longer. The fact that they store more sugar means that there's less starch in that kernel when it's dried down into seed, and that starch is what makes for a more cold-tolerant corn. So consequently, the problem with it is that it is a little bit more susceptible to cold soil emergence problems, damp off, or the pythium fungus that can attack it and make the corn rot in the ground when it's particularly cold and wet when you plant it. So the SEs are a slightly less cold soil tolerant than the non-SEs and the open pollinated varieties. There is also a variety, or there is also a whole class of corn called super sweets, and they have a different gene, and it's called the SH2 gene, and I can go into various deals about it, and I haven't read up on it right at the moment, so a lot of it escapes me. But the sugary enhanced, the super sweet or extra sweet, there's various names that go, the SH2 or the shrunken, they're also called. Those are varieties that are extremely susceptible. They store practically no starch at all. And what you have basically when the seed dries down is a shriveled up lump of sugar. And if you look at the seed, some of it doesn't even look like corn seed. And it is you need to grow it under very excellent conditions. You have to have very warm soil and just the right conditions in order to get good germination on that. We don't carry any super sweets. The only thing we carry is the sugary enhanced ones. Another thing about the super sweets is because of the recessive character of the gene, if it crosses with any other type of corn, it'll immediately convert to a starchy corn or a field type corn. So you've got to isolate it by a couple of 100 yards from other varieties in order to get good corn out of it. People swear by the taste. One thing about this enhanced sweetness corns is they have a tendency, because of the storage of sugar, to be chewier than a lot of the normal sugary and the open pollinated varieties, which are also normal sugary. There's various genetic crossing and recrossing that they're doing in order to make a kernel that's both tender and crisp. A lot of the early super sweets were extremely chewy, and some people like it and some people don't. Some people like a more tender kernel. For instance, with our bicolors, you'll see D'Artagnan's an SE and Duet is not. Duet is a very tender corn. It's not quite as sweet as D'Artagnan, but some people like it better because it's more tender. Northern pickling is a good early season pickling variety of cucumber. Greens, in most instances, all of the greens are good for cold seasons. They have other problems like flea beetle damage, and some have bolting problems. Other greens like the yen chow are better for warmer weather because it's actually a vegetable amaranth, and amaranth are warm weather crops. There are some perennials there that you should really look at, like French sorrel. Always comes up in the spring. It's one of the first greens to appear in the spring. It's a great lemony flavor. Kids will love it. Everybody should plant sorrel. It loves Montana. You should love it too. Kale is an excellent green. It has more available minerals than a lot of the goosefoot greens like Swiss chard and spinach, because it doesn't have the oxalic acid which binds it up. It has a lot of iron. One of the best ones we consider is Harvester kale. It's being dropped by the Danish company. We've picked it up a couple of years ago and are growing it to seed. Once again, it's one of those dwarf varieties. You know, you want to keep the kale in the garden until after the frost to mellow out the flavor a little bit. It's a dwarf variety that you can put down in the mulch, and it'll survive the colder temperatures in the mid to late fall, and hangs in there quite a bit better than the taller varieties that hang up in the wind and cold and seem to frost out earlier. So that's the reason why we like Harvester. That's the reason why we're preserving it for people in our climates. Melons are a big problem. As far as a We carry the Alaska hybrid because you really need some hybrid vigor in order to get melons in our climate, unless you're a good melon grower. Now, good melon growers, and what they do is they use lots of very fresh manure to heat up the ground, and melons don't seem to have any problem with that. Some plants will burn if the manure is too fresh, but if you use lots of fresh manure, if you use various methods to heat up the soil, like black plastic or clear plastic or row covers, anything you can do will benefit melons. They seem to need quite a bit of heat, at least more than we seem to have around here, and they suffer a lot during the cold nights. They seem to just stop growing. The ones that we've selected here are some of the earliest one. Hearts of Gold is kind of on the outside of our growing season. Of the watermelons, we really like that Nikki Lee. It's an improved icebox type. It's right the same size as the Sugar Baby, but the flavor is quite a bit better, and it doesn't seem to get mushy like the Sugar Baby will get sometimes. Keeping the vines healthy on your melon plants are very important. Fertility is important. Water is important. Although peas can be planted quite early, you want to make sure that the ground is not particularly wet when you plant them. They can rot in the ground. We have this fungus called Pythium around, which attacks the peas and the beans, and it's kind of a crapshoot as to whether you have a lot of it or not. If you do, you will lose your beans, especially and peas, early in the season. They will mold and will not come up. The way to avoid it is with fungicides, which we don't carry. So there's a problem there. We're working on a bacterial inoculant. We're not working on it, but the Agricultural Experiment Station up here has a bacterial inoculant. We're trying to get the seed companies interested in it that we purchase our peas from to pre-treat the seeds, or to be able to provide this bacterial inoculant for the peas, because it produces an antibiotic, the bacteria on it, that does kill off the Pythium right around the seed and doesn't allow it to attack the seed. So it's a natural, this bacteria is a naturally occurring antagonist to the Pythium that we find in the soil, so this is a pretty natural product. This is different than the rhizobia bacterial inoculants that are for nitrogen fixation and overall vigor in legumes that you will inoculate your peas and beans with. One of the hardiest of the peas, besides the green arrows, are very reliable. Daybreak is really one you should look at for earliness and for productivity. I can't say enough about Oregon Sugar Pod. Those things are some of the hardiest peas we've come across. They never seem to fail to produce lots of those snow peas. They have a tendency to have kind of a curvy pod on them, but if you can stand that, they're one to go for. They're also very productive. Peppers. Peppers in Montana are not the greatest of friends. You can grow a decent pepper here in Montana. Getting your green peppers to turn red is a little bit of a problem, but you can get green peppers pretty well. Hungarian hot wax is the most reliable hot pepper that you can grow, bar none. It's productive. It's not the hottest pepper. It may not even be the best pepper, but it is the most productive and the most cold tolerant of the hot peppers that we've grown, commonly available. If you want to grow lots of peppers for your salsa, and you just want to have luck doing it, grow lots of Hungarian hot wax. Let's see, spinach. The main problem we have with spinach is bolt tolerance, bolt resistance. All spinach will bolt eventually. It's going to happen. It's just the nature of spinach. Bloomsdale is the standard bolt-resistant one. It's as bolt-resistant as the season of your growing. If it's 95 degrees for a couple of days, it'll bolt just like everything else will. Squash, same problem. Wait until the soil gets warm. Real good varieties we have here. There's so many I could get particular about. There's none that really strike me as being particularly cold soil tolerant or cold tolerant. They've been picked to be some of the earlier ones. Of the winter squashes, it's a little bit more of a problem. They have longer days to maturity. You want to make sure they mature. The frost on the pumpkin scene is not a particularly good thing to wait for with squash and pumpkins. You don't really want to wait till to the frost to get the winter squash and the pumpkins out of the field. the more frost they get, the less storage they'll have. They've shown that to be true. For years I worked at Lifeline Produce, and we let them have a little bit of frost, and we really found that lowered the storage life of them quite dramatically. So really, you should really, I mean, a light frost perhaps. What we usually do with the winter squash is we let if we know it's going to be like, say, 30 degrees or 28 degrees that night, and you got a good leaf cover, we let the frost knock down the leaves basically and kill the leaves off. Then we go right in there and get the winter squash out. It's the best thing to do. Sunflowers. Sundac is a good early variety and unavailable anywhere else but from us. It is gone now. We are the only ones holding it. Swiss chard, once again, a good substitute for spinach in the middle of the year, more heat tolerant than spinach. Tomatoes. Now we're really starting to talk about something, right? Perk up your ears. Ever since a lot of the new breeding efforts in tomatoes, we've had the unusual event of having red tomatoes here in Montana, and there's no reason why you have to eat green tomatoes anymore. You can throw those days aside. It's not necessary. If you like green tomatoes, fine. You can grow those better boys and big boys and braggers and they'll give you lots and lots of green tomatoes and big, wonderful plants that'll grow 8 feet tall and be covered with green tomatoes, and you'll just have a great time with those. And they're available at all the supermarkets. Go out and get them. If you want red tomatoes, these are the varieties that you should look at. If you live in a very short season climate, you don't have a lot of frost-free days, you can get the Rockets and the Glaciers, and they won't be really large tomatoes, but they'll be red, by God. And Rockets will give you lots of them. Lots of tomatoes. They'll be about like this big, and it'll just be covered with them. You can't keep up with them. And I like the flavor of the Rockets. And actually, a lot of our latest tomatoes here, way over here, you see, we start with the earliest tomatoes on page 41, and we go all the way over to page 43, and you think these are our late tomatoes. The last one there, Starfire tomato, is considered an extra early, extra early. Find it in any other catalog, it'll say, this is the earliest tomato known to man. The entire history of civilization is Starfire. Well, we've got about 20 other varieties that are earlier than that. So don't worry about it. You can get tomatoes.
My name is Lucy Brieger. I'm from Lifeline Farm in Victor. And I hope I can help you today to learn how to start your own bedding plants from seed. I'm going to try not to be too successful, because then my bedding plant sales aren't going to be all that hot this year, so I'm not going to give you all my secrets. Let's see, thanks for coming. I certainly didn't expect to see this many faces. It's great to have a foggy day, so everybody's anxious to get out in their yard, so they come to Garden City and try to learn something. I'll start with why in the world would anybody want to grow their own bedding plants when you can buy them from your friendly neighborhood bedding plant store? Well, we only grow a limited variety of things, and if somebody wants a purple and white striped petunia with pink on the edge, chances are you're going to have to search high and low to find it at your bedding plant store, and then you're not going to find it anyway. So if you want to have the maximum choices, then it's good to be able to start your own seeds. Obviously, a lot of people have told me, well, I can never find Nova tomatoes, I can never find Burpees, Longkeeper. Why don't you grow those? Well, only 1 in 500 people even wants them or knows what they are. So we bedding plant growers only grow the ones that we feel like we're going to be able to sell. So sorry on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's easy to grow your own. The thing to remember, though, is that it's not necessarily going to be cheaper in all cases. You want to think about what plants you're going to start on your own, and then if you're going to make the commitment to go ahead and do it, well then you might as well do it right, because sometimes you're going to end up buying seeds, and then pretty soon it's the end of May, and darn, I forgot to start my tomatoes. Well, you've already put the expense into buying the seeds, which is often almost as much it's going to start to buy 2 tomato plants when Lifeline has them on sale, 3 for $1, because it's getting close to the end of the season. So, think about it a little bit. If you make the commitment, well, go ahead and follow through and make your plans and stick with them, or unless you want to, unless it's not going to pay off. So once you've made the commitment and decide you're going to do it and decide what you're going to do, well, it's time to make plans. First and foremost, start with good seeds. If someone, found some seeds at Kmart, 10 for $1, and gives them to you and says, here, use these, don't waste your time with them. Trust me, it just doesn't work. I've had so many people come to me and say, these seeds, what's wrong with my seed? What's going on here? Why didn't they make it? Well, there'll be a seed someone will have given them seeds and they were dated, 3 years ago, which isn't necessarily bad, but you don't know how they were stored. Maybe they were exposed to moisture. Who knows what? Chances are they're not going to be any good, and why risk it? It just doesn't really make that much sense. So start with good seeds. If it's May and you want to start your own tomatoes, well then forget it. It's too late. So pay attention to the calendar and count backwards. If it's March and you're wanting to start your tomatoes, well, fine. But and if you want to start your own cucumbers this year, don't do it in February. Wait till the end of April or so. So pay attention to what's written on your seed packets. Unless, of course, you've bought some seeds that come from Texas, then you won't want to pay attention to the directions because they're not going to apply in this region. But given that your directions on your seed packet are correct, follow them, because they're there for a reason. They're there to guide you in timing your plants, and it's essential information. The reason it's essential is, obviously, you can't if you start a cucumber in February in a pot, well, it's going to be root bound by the end of March. Well, it's going to want to go into seed and flower and stuff, and then by the time you can put it into the ground at the end of May, it's going to be too late. It's not going to make it. It's going to be a real unhealthy plant, if not a dead one. So timing is essential. Starting your own seeds. Okay, so you've decided what seeds you want to start. You know when to start what seeds. You've got to decide on what container to put them in. Well, again, planning is the key. If you're going to start something like petunias, for instance, you want to select a small seed container. Say you have a border and you know that you're going to want one petunia plant every foot, and it's 20 feet. Well, then you're going to need at least 20 petunia plants. So you're going to have to start, say, 30 seeds. So decide, you need to figure out how much space you have per packet of seed, right? If you only have a windowsill that's this big, or this much space to start seeds, well, you're not going to be able to start 500 of every type of seed. You don't have the space. So you need to plan, again, how much space you have, how many plants you need of each variety. And once you get into the knack of planning, it's quite simple, but you need to realize all your parameters, like obviously amount of space and amount of soil and amount of containers you have and amount of plants that you actually need. So, okay, back to containers. What containers are best? You don't want to use any more soil than you absolutely have to, right? Because nothing's free. And so you need to select the container that will optimize the amount of soil per seed. Generally, a couple inches is about all you need. So, and just a rule of thumb for commercial growers anyway, we use 10 by 20 trays. I'm sure you've seen them when you go to Bilo and buy bedding plants. They have their plants displayed in these flats. Those flats are almost always perforated on the bottom, and they make real handy seed starting containers. They're 10 by 20, and they're about 2 inches deep. And if you put your bedding, your germinating medium in there, you can divide. You're rarely going to want 10 by 20 inches worth of any one variety, right? So you're going to want to divide that tray up into divisions and, for instance, put petunias here and tomatoes here and peppers here and whatever else here. It's not hard to divide them up, but something I've learned is to make a dam, make a levee, make a tiny levee either with a popsicle sticks or soil or some other border that's not going to wash away or be jiggled away. What I used to do when I was, say I wanted a half tray of 2 types of petunias, I dig a little well in the middle to divide the tray of soil, and then when I water it, all the seeds wash into the center, so it's a real bad, and then things get mixed up, and then who knows which is pink and which is white. So don't make a well, make a division that stands up so your things have no possibility of getting mixed up, right? Okay, so you have your container, and you know how many seeds you're going to need, and you know the right time to plant those seeds. Now you need to figure out what to grow them in. We've already talked about not wanting to use more medium than you absolutely have to, because it's not cheap always. One thing you do need to do is not trust your own soil. Don't just go out in the yard and dig up a handful of pick up a shovelful of dirt and stick it in your tray. It's really a bad idea, and it's a bad idea because almost always that soil is not going to be adequate for germinating. It's almost always going to be, it's going to get too cakey. It's going to be too compacted in your trays, and there's just no point in not springing the, some money to get your plant started. It doesn't need to be a rich potting soil now. It doesn't need to have a high nitrogen content, because the seeds come with their own nitrogen ready to go. They come with their own, uh-oh, what's going on here? Oh, okay. They come with their own feed, so they can sustain themselves for a certain amount of time anyway through germination until they have their first couple sets of true leaves. So you don't need to, you shouldn't in fact use potting soil for seeding. Use a medium that's for germinating, which will be much cheaper than a potting soil. So anyway, use the right thing. Don't use a real rich soil, and don't use just straight garden soil. If you want to make your own, that's fine. Just make sure you have plenty of the right elements in it. It needs to have something like vermiculite or perlite to keep it real loose. It needs to have something like peat or something that's quite high in organic matter so that it can retain moisture. It needs to have something like sand so that it can so that it doesn't have, it's not standing in water. It needs not to have very much clay, because that'll tend to crack. It'll absorb a whole bunch of water to where things get waterlogged, or if it dries out, then it's cracked and your seeds fall into the cracks, and then they don't germinate because they're too deep. So there's, it seems like you ought to just be able to go out and get a shovelful of dirt. Well, people call me up all the time, well, what's wrong with my seeds? And so I walk them through the whole process. Well, what'd you plant them in? And they'll say, well, I just went out and got a shovelful of dirt and stuck the seeds in a cup in the window, and well, 9 times out of 10 it just turned to clay, and then of course nothing is going to germinate very well. So use the right planting medium. Okay, I already talked about my next one. I said figure out timing. If you're like me, you'll want to give your seeds every last chance. You want to give them anything you can do to help them germinate around here. You want to do it, and so what I do, just to sort of hedge my bet, some of you might think this is a little bit silly, and maybe it is, I don't think so, is I pay attention to the phases of the moon and the planting calendar, and I happen to use the Kimberton calendar, which gives you the astrological report. There's fruit, earth, air, fire, and water are the constellations represent these elements. And there's plenty of evidence that says that this is true, and that these influences are there. They're subtle. It's not going to make the difference. If I plant my petunias on a fruit day instead of a flower day, it's not going to make the difference in whether I have flowers or don't have flowers. It's a subtle difference. Anyway, I want to optimize the amount of flowers I get. I want to make my plants as healthy as I can. So I go ahead and pay attention. What do I have to lose by go ahead and planting on the flower day, which corresponds to the air? Fruit would be a seed day. Air is the flower day. Root is the earth day, and water is the leaf day. So anyway, that gets to be a little bit complicated. It's explained real easily for anybody that's interested in the Kimberton Hills calendar, and there are other astrological calendars as well. I keep talking about petunias just because that's what I happen to be doing these days is starting petunias. It's a good example because the seeds are expensive and there's a billion varieties of them, so that it may be something that you want to grow your own, and the seeds are tiny. So you know, it's not hard to figure out cucumber seeds because, you know, you can fit, you know, just a few of them in your hand and you can count them real easily and figure out how many you want and all that. Petunias or anything that's really tiny, you need to work backwards to figure out if you've got the right amount of seeds, and then when you have seeds that, you know, you can fit 100 on a pinhead, how do you distribute them evenly in your tray so that you don't have 100 all in the space of a pinhead there? And then what do you do with those? Use sand. Works great every time. Just sift your sand with your, I just use a little T-ball and sift the sand and get just the finest sand I can get. By the way, don't use dust because don't use dirt because it's too dusty and it flies away and you're coughing and stuff. You need something heavy, so sand is perfect. So get your little T-ball and sift it, and, you know, just get like a teaspoon of sand and your tiny little pinhead full of seeds. Get a tiny container, mix them. I just use a little scoop, a coffee scoop, mix them up, and then put it back in your T-ball and just sift it over your soil, and that way you get an even dispersal, whatever, of seeds, and that works out real well. Make sure your seeding medium is absolutely wet before you put the seeds in it, right? Okay, so now we've got our wet seeding tray with the medium that's correct for germinating seeds. You've dispersed your seeds evenly on your tray, and now you want them to germinate. So the main thing to control here is, everybody thinks light. Well, light certainly, but also heat is something that people seem to not understand. It's real important if you want your seeds to germinate quickly, which means the more healthy plants are the ones not that have kind of straggled up over a period of weeks, but you want them to come right up. You need to keep the soil warm. So one way to do that is to have a germinating chamber. If your house gets to 50 at night, then you might need to think about, you know, some arrangement that you can keep your trays warmer at night. 60 is pretty minimal. Certainly doesn't mean that you're not going to get seeds germinating if your house is, you know, 70 during the day and 50 at night, but it's just going to take longer, and then you start to lose the advantage of starting them anyway. So you need to keep them warm at night. One way to keep them warm is to make sure that you always water with warm water. Light, of course, is important at somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 hours a day. If you have substantially less than that, when you do have your seeds germinate, they're going to be straggly and leggy. And the taller and leggier they are, then certainly the less healthy they're going to be and the less productive in the long run. So you need a stocky, stout plant that germinates fast and doesn't get leggy. So it needs to have plenty of light, plenty of warmth. The best thing to do is, when you have your pack of seeds, before you even open it, make your labels. You can cut up old milk cartons, old sour cream containers, anything that's plastic, because obviously paper over the time that the seeds are growing is going to deteriorate, and you're not going to be able to read what you've written. So get something that's plastic or wood, like popsicle sticks or something like that. Get an indelible marker. Make sure that you've marked well what you've planted. And another idea about keeping things warm at night, what we do is cover our 10 by 20 flat planting trays with glass, and then it's just like having a lid on your pot, you know, when you're cooking. It just keeps the heat in, and that seems to help quite a bit. So just some kind of cover. On a cloudy day like this, I've left everything covered because it's not going to get too hot, probably. Here's something else not to cover them with. Don't cover them with plastic unless you can keep it firm around the edges, because this is something else I've done. Gotten a big piece of saran wrap and covered a tray with a piece of saran wrap. Well, what happens is that it gets warm, the water condenses on the plastic and drips down. Then when it drips down, it it hits the top of the soil, right? And then the seeds stick to that. And then you lift up your plastic, and who knows how many seeds are stuck to it, and so you've lost your plants right there because they're stuck on your plastic, and you might not even know it because they don't look like seeds. They look like pieces of dirt, or sometimes you might not even notice that it's there. So you need something that's rigid. If you start your seeds in something small, like a little cup, and you decide to use saran wrap, fine. Just put a rubber band around the edge so that it can't fall into the soil. Certainly dangers in watering too much, because damp off it's a problem. It's not hard to control, and that's just by not watering too much. If you keep the air moving, somehow it really seems to help damping off. If you touch a flat or plants that have the damp off, go ahead and make sure your hands are clean or completely dry before you go handle anything else. But obviously the best thing is not to have damping off in the first place. And like I said, it's not hard to control if you can just make sure you think about how you're watering. It just takes a little bit of practice. Like what happens with nitrogen is it encourages plant development at the expense generally of root development. And for transplants, you really want to encourage strong, big roots. That's what you're aiming for. You want big roots, strong roots. So I would go ahead and use it. But you just might pay attention. You don't want your plants to get real big and leafy before you transplant them. You want to, well, you transplant them when they have their first set of true leaves. Yeah. Another thing we've learned the hard way, you just can't get around it. If you use light that doesn't have the full spectrum, then you're just going to have leggy plants that aren't right. So don't, there's no sense to even try it. About transplanting, this gentleman right here already gave away the main tip here. That's to handle your seedlings by the leaves. Never mess with the stem, and don't even think about touching the roots. You don't want to disturb the roots, and you don't want to touch the stem, because if you touch the stem, then you're sunk. If you break the stem, you're sunk. Your plant's, dead, basically. And so it can regrow leaves. That's what it's there for. It can grow leaves like wild, but it doesn't regrow if you break the stem, and if you mess with the roots, and they don't like that. So handle them by the leaves. You need to get them out of your tray, and you need to do that with as little jostling and irritation to the plant as possible, which means that your potting medium to begin with has to be very loose. So that's why the idea of just using vermiculite is a good one, because that'll never cake up, it'll never get hard. So loosen them as gently as you can, and then handle it by the leaf. Have your pot ready to go, have it watered, have your hole to put your plant in already dug. The idea is to have that plant exposed to the air for as little time as possible. You want to lift it up, put it right back in, and water it, and you don't want it to be any less fast than that for optimum results. I said make sure you have your pot ready to go. Well, and here's something else. You're going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what size pot is best for a business like ours, where you're running a greenhouse. And actually it's going to be the same for you, because you're not going to have unlimited space, and you're not going to have unlimited potting soil. So anyway, for us, we have to optimize the size of pot, therefore the amount of soil per plant. And then we can optimize the amount of plants that we have in our greenhouse, right? Because greenhouses aren't free to operate, and so you have to optimize your space in there. So that all comes down to the size of pot you use, and so you need to make sure that your pot is big enough to accommodate the amount of roots that you want that your plant's going to grow by the time you put it into the ground, right? But at the same time, you don't want to put a tomato into a 10-inch bucket, because it doesn't need that. You're going to be wasting a lot of soil and a lot of water and a lot of time and a lot of space. The idea with the potting medium is to have enough nitrogen, or the minerals and things that the plant needs to grow. So this is when simply germinating medium won't do. You have to have something that'll give your plant what it needs. We make ours, and do you want the recipe necessarily? We use 2 parts of peat, 1 part sand, 1 part vermiculite, and about 2/3 part compost, a cup of, or approximately, to my measures, I use about 3/4 of a cup of wood ash for the pH to be correct, and then I use either bone meal or rock phosphate, or now I'm using rock dust in it with good result for a little bit more trace elements and what have you. I know that's what I'm forgetting. Make sure that you're planting, if you're gonna direct seed something or start your own transplants, make sure that you're starting seeds that like to be transplanted. For instance, don't seed something like Iceland poppies in a tray, or Oriental poppies, or many other kinds of poppies, and expect them to do well when you disturb their roots and put them into a pot. They won't. If the seed package or their seed catalog or whatever else is your resource guide says that they don't transplant well, believe them, because it's probably true. The one thing that seems to be an exception to that, for me anyway, is ageratum. Almost all knowledge, common knowledge in catalog says don't transplant ageratum. Well, we transplant ageratum every year, and they seem to do quite well. So maybe that's one goof. Maybe I'm somehow lucky. But peat pots are really only necessary for a very few things, I found. Something that doesn't like its roots disturbed. Like I often direct seed Iceland poppies or lupins into peat pots. Just like a couple of seeds per pot, and then when it grows and it has, it grows in that pot to a big enough size that I can just stick it out into its permanent place or into a bigger pot. But peat pots are, if you're going to use very many of them, they get to be a little bit expensive too, so you don't want to use them unless you really need to.
What about clay pots?
Clay, I don't really know anything about clay pots. They're not practical in a greenhouse setting. For house plants, I've always had good luck with them, and so I can't imagine that they wouldn't serve you well for transplanting something like your tomatoes. Again, as long as they're not so porous that the roots tend to grow into the pot itself.
I use styrofoam cups.
Yeah, I have too before.
It's really good.
Yeah. I don't know who's next. Yeah.
Would I have to use flats? I mean, we're talking about if we're going to have an abundance of
No.
particular kind. I mean, why couldn't I use styrofoam cups?
Yeah, you can use cups to start with. You don't want to put very many, that's only a little cup, so you wouldn't want to have more than a handful of seeds in there.
I realize it takes up probably more space.
Takes up more space and more soil.
Transplanting from the flat into...
Oh, you mean just direct seed it into the cup and then let it go there, let it stay. Yeah, if you have that much space. And anymore in greenhouses, it's all bottom water and to wick up. But that's an investment that we just haven't felt is necessary. A lot of times it'll be that you'll really knock your plants over. They'll look like they're wilted or something when you water them, and they're just leaned over with the pressure of the water. But boy, I haven't ever noticed that seems to hurt them. It seems like you get really strong plants that way. To talk about the timing, make sure you're not going to be, you've done all this work to grow your nice little seedlings, and you're really anxious. It's warm out, it's beautiful, it's 80 degrees every day, and it's May 2nd, and you say, it's not going to frost, I'm going to stick my tomatoes out. Well, it's going to frost again. There's just no doubt about it. It's going to frost again. So don't even think about getting a jump on your tomatoes or tender seedlings, because they're not going to make it unless you protect them, and unless you protect them well. And here we go, talking about how stupid I am again. I stuck my cucumber seedlings out one mid-May. It was around the 16th or something like that, and put them out in the ground, and they were nice, and they were growing well, and I covered them with tunnels, right? They were under plastic tunnels. Well, sure enough, on about the 29th, we had a frost, and it froze through the tunnels. So that cured me. I'm not ever going to I'm not even going to think about experimenting again with tunnels or anything like that. If I have maybe a wall of water around a tomato, maybe that's something else. That's something I've never experimented with, and I probably won't, because they're expensive, and on a field scale it doesn't make that much sense for me. But
Make a suggestion.
yeah, black plastic mulch on your soil. Punch a hole in the soil to accommodate your tomato plant. and put your plant in, and then cover that with your plastic tunnel. Did I translate?
Jug full of water.
Oh, and then milk jugs full of water at the rate of how many?
Great.
How many per plant? About milk. 2 milk jugs per plant, about, and then that'll protect you to 25 degrees. Is that right?
At least.
Okay, at least 25 degrees. Hardening off is quite important. The plants, if they're growing inside all their lives, they're not accustomed to the direct sunlight. They're not accustomed to wind. Their stems often are a little bit soft and just not quite as strong as they need to be. So you can't just take them out of the house and stick them right into the garden. Certainly not in the middle of the afternoon on a sunny day. If you've forgotten to harden off your plants and you're going to go on vacation, you got to get them out in the garden or whatever, and you've forgotten to harden them off, well, make sure you plant them in the late afternoon or evening so that at least they're not stuck out in the ground in the big middle of the hot sunny day. And but anyway, what you really need to do, is harden them off. And a week is generally considered pretty minimal, a good amount of time. And you start out, if you can, take them out just for a couple hours, few hours the first few days, and just gradually lengthen that time so that they're out around the clock the last few days or week or whatever, and then put them into the ground, and you'll certainly avoid transplant shock that way. Unless, of course, you forget to water them when you put them in the ground, and that's one way to shock them pretty good. As far as fertilizing, we prepare our fields ahead of time with compost at the rate of 7 to 10 tons per acre, and that's just about it. When I stick something like tomatoes in the ground, then I'll usually put a scoop of rock phosphate and or wood ash in the spot for each plant, and after that they're on their own. And I don't,
You don't fertilize your seedlings?
No, I don't fertilize the seedlings. Not if you have a good potting mix. In the greenhouse, if I, like last spring when we had a really wet, cool May and June, and all of us poor bedding plant growers were sitting there with greenhouses full of huge big plants that nobody was buying because it was too cold to put them in the garden. And they kept growing in the greenhouse because there was certainly enough light to keep the greenhouse warm and keep the plants growing. Well, so we all had our huge big plants getting root bound in our carefully selected pots because it was getting too late. They were in their pots way too long. I did a lot of fertilizing last year, and I used manure tea, which is quite simple to make, especially if you have 60 cows hanging around.